We talk about human rights all the time, like they're set in stone, right? The right to speak, the right to live, the right to be free. We just assume they're these solid, permanent things. But what if? What if the very ground we're standing on isn't nearly as firm as we think? Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating argument that questions the very source code of our rights, and we're going to explore where that code might lead. So, this is the idea that really kicks this whole thing off, from an analysis by Andrew Corner. The argument is actually pretty simple, but wow, it's profound. It says that if we can't agree on where our rights come from, specifically from a creator, then the rights themselves can't possibly mean the same thing to all of us. They become something totally different depending on who you ask. And this leads us right to the heart of this entire explainer. Where do our rights really come from? Are they a gift from some higher power? Or are they a brilliant human invention, something we just reasoned our way into? According to the source material we're looking at, the answer to that question changes absolutely everything. So first up, let's break down this fundamental disagreement over the source code of our rights. Because that code, well, it determines everything about them, including how easily they can be changed or even deleted. This right here is the central idea. It's not just about having rights, it's about where they originated. The author's point is that the origin story of a right, whether it's some unchangeable inheritance or just a negotiated deal, is what gives it its real power and stability. Now, to really get a handle on these two competing sources of rights, we need to get a couple of key terms straight. They might sound a little academic, but trust me, the ideas are actually super simple. First, we've got etymology. Now, normally you think of this as, the origin of a word, but here we're using it way more broadly. It's the source of an idea. Think of it like a birth certificate for a concept. Where was the whole idea of rights actually born? And the second term is epistemology. This is all about the theory of knowledge. Or to put it simply, how do we know something is true? If etymology is the birth certificate, then epistemology is the DNA test. It's the proof we use to say, yes, these rights are real and they are true. All right, so with those two ideas in our back pocket, let's explore the first model. This is the one where rights come from a creator, acting as a kind of external anchor. The classic example here, of course, is the U.S. Declaration of Independence. In this view, rights aren't granted by a king or a government, nope. They are endowed by their creator. This means they exist before any government is even a thing. So the government's only job is to protect these pre-existing rights. And here's the crucial part. This places the source of rights completely outside of human control. We can't touch them. And the whole strategic point of this model is to build a firewall. By anchoring rights to what the author calls an unmoved mover, it's designed specifically to stop the powerful from just redefining or even erasing the rights of the weak. It's like the rules of the game are set by a higher authority, so the players on the field can't just change them whenever they want. Okay, now for the big alternative. Rights that don't come from a creator, but from human calculation. This is the internal system, where rights are basically derived from our own logic and reason. And the shift in thinking here is just massive. Rights are no longer something we are given. Instead, they're something we derive or extract. We actually figure them out, almost the same way a mathematician works through a super complex proof to get to a final logical conclusion. So how in the world do you get human rights from a calculator? Well, the source material lays out a few paths. You could start with a simple axiom. Hey, if we're all human, then the rules have to apply equally to all of us. That's just logic. Or you could use something like game theory, which basically proves that respecting each other's rights is the best strategy for long-term survival. It's what's called a Nash equilibrium. In this view, a world without rights just isn't rational or efficient. So let's put these two big ideas side by side. You've got the creator model, where authority is external and rights are an objective inheritance. Then you have the calculation model, where authority is internal and rights are more of a subjective negotiated deal. And look at the key vulnerabilities. One model depends on a shared faith, which, can be contested. The other, it's vulnerable to being recalculated by whoever's in power. And that vulnerability brings us to the author's main critique of this whole mathematical model of rights. What happens when the person holding the calculator has bad intentions? This is what the author calls the fatal flaw. The second that rights become a product of human calculation, they also become subject to human manipulation. They're not a fixed external standard anymore. They're an internal variable that can be tweaked and changed. And according to the argument, here's how that erosion could happen. It's a kind of step-by-step process. First, you get everyone to agree rights are based on logic. Okay, sounds reasonable. But then, who gets to define that logic? Who picks the variables for the equation? The most powerful people, right? And pretty soon, that calculation can be adjusted for things like efficiency or the greater good. And in that recalculation, the rights of a minority, the ones labeled inefficient, can simply be calculated right out of existence. So after laying all of that out, the author brings us back to the original point, but with a much clearer, sharper focus on why that external anchor is so incredibly important. And this quote just nails the core difference perfectly. A given right is an objective inheritance, something you're just born with. But a calculated right, that's a subjective negotiation, and it's always on the table, always up for debate. As the analysis argues, they are fundamentally not the same thing at all. This brings us to the author's final, strengthened thesis. A right that comes from a creator is an inheritance, and it's designed to limit the power of the strong. But a right that comes from human reason, that's just a procedural grant. It's like a permission slip that the powerful can decide to revoke whenever the math doesn't suit them anymore. And this is really the ultimate takeaway from the author's perspective. That theological model, especially the one that was so influential in the American founding, it wasn't just some random philosophical choice. It was a unique and deliberate technology designed for one very specific purpose: to build a foundation for rights so solid that no amount of clever logic or political power could ever legally calculate the weak out of existence. And that leaves us with a final and, frankly, a chillingly relevant question for right now. This whole debate isn't just about history or philosophy. As we're building artificial intelligences that are way more powerful and logical than we are, what kind of source code for our rights are we going to give them? Will we anchor our own value in something external and unchangeable? Or will we trust the cold calculation of a machine? The answer to that question might just determine our entire future.